Am I on? All right. Sorry about the late start. I feel like once you start one late, you're going to start the next late.
Hey, I've been late today. I don't care.
So.
As long as it's done. Late for everything.
Oh, so good. And then we have business meeting after Sunday school. So, all right. I'm going to do the best I can in Dorothy's absence. I got a hold of her teacher's guide yesterday. And this week we are on submitting to authority and God's authority is what we're talking about. And let me find here it is. Okay. And so our scripture for this week is Mark 12:17, when Jesus says to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him, which we'll get more into that in a bit on what the context of that is. And then Romans 13:1, as well as 6-8, where Paul writes, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." And then he continues, says, "This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law." I like that. That's the one debt to keep. And then 1 Peter 2:13-17 says, "Submit yourselves to for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as a supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, and honor the emperor." All right. So, the thing has a story that seems crazy to me. I can go through it if you want, but this kid, and I was a Christian really early on. I got saved at a young age. But this kid in kindergarten, I'm telling you what, I'm going to read this story. I don't identify with this kid because even as a saved kid in kindergarten, I was not this good. It says, "When I was in kindergarten, my dad had a rule against taking our toys out of the house. He was afraid we would lose them. And so one day I took a toy to school. And when I got home, I began to tell my father what I had done, but before I could explain, he yelled at me and sent me to my room. Well, a few minutes later, he opened the door, tears in his eyes, knelt beside me, and asked for my forgiveness, as my mother had told him that I had taken the toy as a present for another kid because he didn't have very much money and he never brought anything to show and tell. And I told my dad I thought Jesus wanted me to share with the boy. And my father looked at me and said, 'Yes, he did, pal. I was unfair to you. I'm so sorry.' And said my dad was always quick to admit his mistakes. But every earthly father gets his title and role from our Heavenly Father, but he charges the fathers with duty and authority to train, guide, and protect our children. But the authority of our parents is not absolute, just like the authority of government is not absolute. We first have to submit to God first. So if Jesus tells us to do something, and it's contrary to what the authorities said, we still have to obey God. Most of the time that doesn't come up. And I don't remember it ever coming up for me with my parents at all. And I don't know why he couldn't have just asked his dad before. He would have said yes. But that's, to me, kind of part of why the story is so ridiculous. And then secondly, what kindergartner? I just wasn't a good kid, I guess. But that doesn't resonate with me at all as a kindergartner. Maybe you guys were more generous when you were in kindergarten. But
sometimes kids, they think the thought and they act on it before they realize I should have asked mom or dad.
Yeah, well, that's true too. They're more impulsive.
They're thinking like, we're taught to give to others that are in need and stuff like it. So he's a little kindergartner and he doesn't think his dad would mind, so he gives to this other kid who's less fortunate. And
And we're always telling the kids to share and all.
Daddy
So
might have already been at work.
that's true. That's true.
He couldn't take it.
You do, I guess. It just,
Yeah.
I guess I was less generous as a
went to
kid.
play that was at the high school. It was Annie.
Oh
I
yeah.
took Lydia, and she was little, and we lived across the street from the high school. And we got home, and she looked out the window over at the high school, and she said, "That poor little girl. I need to take her some of my clothes."
Oh, that's so sweet.
So little kids do like internalize that stuff.
We're going to try something here, Steve.
Okay.
Dave is over there. He can hear you part of the time with that new sound thing they got, but he hears you real good through these mics.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're going to set this mic beside you and see if that does any difference. See if
Okay.
it picks you up.
How you doing, Dave? As long as, it doesn't seem like there's any feedback either, so that's good. Yeah. So some of the context for what we're talking about today is that at the time of the New Testament, the Jews were living under foreign domination. Rome was an empire that was ruling over them, and so that was it was very different that they didn't have their own leadership. Roman citizens themselves didn't have very many rights. The rest of the subjects had even fewer. But they did have some general protections, I suppose. But if you had any public objections to Rome or to the ruling parties, it was considered seditious, and you would be locked up. So it was very important for the early church that they get it across that we need to submit to the authorities. We submit to God, but we submit to the authorities because, well, we'll get to what Peter had to say about it. But the earliest Christians viewed spreading the gospel as their primary responsibility, which is ironic. Well, it's not ironic, but I mean, honestly, that should still be our primary responsibility, is spreading the gospel. But that's what they viewed as their number one responsibility, was spreading the gospel. And so they tried to avoid actions that might hinder their message. Because if you're trying to spread the gospel to a bunch of Romans, and you're doing things that seem to go against Rome, the Romans are going to be less likely to listen to what you have to say. You know?
Was it recognized after Christ was resurrected? Christianity was not considered recognized as a religion.
Yeah, it was just an offshoot of the Jewish people, the way. But as they're trying to get people to believe in Jesus, they don't want to create a situation where people that believe in Jesus are labeled as seditious or traitors or whatever that would hinder their ability to spread the gospel. Yeah.
It had already been established. They recognized that, plus their Roman gods and stuff, and they recognized them. But when Christianity started in, they didn't recognize it as a religion. They recognized it as a false religion.
Yeah, it was quite a while before the Roman Empire actually got on board with Christianity. I think there was an emperor in like 300 and something AD that converted to Christianity, and then that kind of changed things. But was it Constantine, or does anybody know their history? Well, Carl would know it right off the bat, but I don't know. I feel like somewhere in the 300 ADs, but he might know, yeah.
So about the late 200s AD, you'd have Constantine the First was a little bit softer on Christianity than what previous emperors have been. It was Constantine the Second, which is one they refer to as Constantine the Great, is the one that made it where it's no longer illegal to be a Christian. Now,
And that was, what, like 313 or something like that?
that time of year, right there.
Not that it matters.
I
but-
think around like 298, or 298 is like 300. Because at that point, the empire was split between like 4 different emperors.
Oh.
So Constantine was the one amongst 4 that wasn't actively persecuting Christians. And he took a lot of flack for it, and a lot of the wars that were fought were actually over that. Because a lot of the other emperors that were fighting for control were actually blaming Christians of, well, hey,
Yeah, I don't know enough about my ancient history.
Wasn't one of the Constantines that allowed like the Council of Nicene to get, wasn't that under one of them? I thought.
Maybe. I don't know enough about my old church history. I'm sorry. I don't know. I probably shouldn't have started down that because I don't know. He was over one of the councils or
That Council
something.
of Nicene wasn't
Nicene, maybe?
Yeah, Council of Nicaea.
Nicaea?
Yeah, but wasn't it one of those, because like Corey was saying there were several of them, and I think it was one of them that allowed that council to meet to start trying to kind of put the Bible together and come up with,
Oh.
I think it was.
Organize things a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, because in 310 AD, so I think it would have been under Constantine the Great, actually, Constantine the Second.
Because it was one of them, but like you said, there are several and
Yeah, there were a bunch of them.
anyway, sorry.
No, you're fine. So the first one is, I think, Mark, where he says, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." So in that part of Scripture, so Mark is going through a series of stories that kind of have a very consistent structure, where people that don't like Jesus come up and they give him some kind of a question, tricky, controversial, whatever, trying to get him to stumble in his response so they can pounce on him or have something against him. And then Jesus gives a response that silences them or frustrates them or challenges them or whatever. And there's, I don't know, 6 or 8 of these different examples as you go through the book of Mark. There's quite a bit of that in Mark. But in this case, the opponents had aimed to trick Jesus and harm his reputation and subvert his authority because if he'd have said yes or no, he'd have been in trouble. And we'll get to that. But that was the idea behind it. So, and in this case, the sects, the different Jewish sects, would actually work together sometimes, as we see in this section. It's the Pharisees and the Herodians that ask him that, who normally don't get along, but you find that nothing makes better friends than a common enemy, and which is it's an old saying, but it's true. And anyway, so they worked together, came up with this question, and they asked him, and the problem would have been if Jesus had answered yes. Because they asked him, is it right or lawful? Is it right to pay the imperial tax of Caesar? Is what they'd asked him, right? And so if he had answered yes, then the Pharisees can say, well, he's violated the law of Moses. And if he answers no, the Herodians, whose power came from Rome, can charge him with treason. So it's like a win-win for these guys. They're like, we've got him. We figured out how to get him. We've got him. And so Jesus, he says, give me a coin. He doesn't answer yes or no. He's not constricted to the what they say, you know. It's just like when somebody asks you a question, you don't have to answer. I mean, unless you're in court and the judge is telling you to, I think that's the only time. You don't have to answer every question somebody asks you. It's generally common courtesy to, but you don't have to. And you don't have to answer it the way they're expecting it. But anyway, so he asks for a coin, and he gets a coin, and he looks at the coin, and then he shows it to the people that are asking the question. He says, who is this guy? Whose picture's on this coin? And they're like, well, that's Caesar, And he might not have said it like that. They might not have said it like that, but that's how I picture it. And so he just tells them, well, give back to Caesar what's due him. If his picture's on it, it's his. Give it to him, Give back to Caesar what's due him. Using the coin, recognize Caesar's earthly authority, and the benefits that they might receive from Caesar's civil government, because they have roads and they have some protection against attackers and stuff like that, military order and probably better buildings and things like that. But at the same time, he goes on to say, give to God the things that are owed to him. So not taking any authority away from God. So he's covered both directions, Believers know that God is owed honor and respect and obedience and worship. And Caesar is not ultimate authority or deity, but if he's provided you with these things, it's perfectly reasonable to give him back some of the money that he's printed, to help cover that. There's nothing wrong with that. So he got around trying to say that Caesar was a god or that he had some kind of authority, beyond just the earthly authority. Incredibly clever, I mean, sometimes I think, I'm pretty bright, but man, when you compare God, like, I'm an idiot, I mean, it's...
Well, even in one of the verses you used in your sermon, what Jesus told Pilate was that you wouldn't have any authority if it weren't for my Father. Your authority comes from God.
Yeah, all authority comes from him. So, yeah. That was in John. Yeah, that was if you kept reading on John, where I went about. He talks about because he's saying those that delivered me to you did the greater harm, or did the greater sin, because you wouldn't even have the authority to condemn me if it weren't given to you by my Father. And so, yeah. The next section in
Parallel to that too
yeah.
is like Caesar's image is on the coin, so give that to him. And we're in the image of God, so we should
Give ourselves to God. Oh, that's good. I hadn't even thought of that. Ooh, deep. That's good. Yeah. No, I like that. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's, give to God's what's God's, and we are God's. Yeah. We should be giving ourselves to God. So the next portion is in Romans 13. And now in this, Paul has written this letter to introduce himself to the followers of Christ that are in Rome. And he explains the gospel message. He corrects some rumors, and he addressed some misconceptions regarding his character and his message. And one of the things that had been distorted about Paul's teaching was that some people were saying that he was encouraging his converts to do evil so that good may come. And so that was something that he covered in that letter a few different times. That just because we have this freedom in Christ doesn't mean that we go and do evil, And, we shouldn't do evil that grace may abound more, And he says these things in the letter to kind of clear it up. And so with that in mind, we look at what he says here in 13:1 and then 6 through 8. But 13:1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. So to be subject to, or is to be ranked under another, or to, to serve, or to be subservient to. But what?
To obey the laws.
Yeah, to obey the laws, right? And
Like your rulers, like the governors and your mayors, obey the laws that they set up.
And for the most part, Paul does that really well, and the Christians do that really well, with some exceptions. We do see that Paul was imprisoned multiple times for allegedly unlawful conduct. And we see that, what happened with Peter and John in the Sanhedrin in Acts 5, where they say, we must obey God rather than human beings, And so there are times where they're told not to preach the gospel. Well, they go ahead and preach, But otherwise speaking, yeah, they did the best they could to be lawful citizens, or, obey the laws,
They have to obey the laws of the earthly leaders, or obey the laws of God. They chose the laws of God. That meant getting beaten or imprisoned by the laws of the land, from the mayors, the governors, but they still have God's mercy and blessings, and they're still in God's will. I mean, they're doing God's will, but not the will of those on the land.
Yeah, when there's a conflict between what you're being told to do and what God wants us to do, that's where you have the issue. And that's where we should be following God's direction instead of man's direction. But that can be difficult sometimes because there are consequences and there are risks. And
There are
it's
consequences
hard to
on
make
the
those
other
decisions
side, too.
sometimes. What?
There's consequences on the other side too.
Yeah.
Like there's consequences, earthly consequences, but you don't follow Jesus, and there's consequences.
Oh, there's potentially eternal consequences too, depending upon what's going on.
Wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. Choose wisely. Yeah.
They did choose. They
Uh,
chose to follow the laws of God, and they were in prison. And that's just it. You've got to choose between your earthly and your heavenly.
So, in this current day and age where we're living right now, there aren't a whole lot of times where like for example, our city government or our state government or even our national government is saying and doing things that are, or that are making us do things, or they're creating laws that are specifically against the will of God. Now, there are some examples, but for the most part, we're good. Like we're able to come here this morning and there wasn't a bit of concern, you know. I'm not worried that there's going to be a raid where they come in and they haul us off to jail or something like that. I'm not worried that when we have, when they set up the booth, the Oasis booth at the parade, that they're going to all be shackled, you know, and taken away. I'm not worried about that right now, but I mean, it could, yeah, and if you look at the book of Revelation, eventually it probably will get like that. But what circumstances can you think of where it would be appropriate to go against earthly authority, do you think? Can you think of anything specifically? Earthly authority, you know? Yeah.
If you're a woman and you're pregnant, and somebody tries to force you to have an abortion against your will, that's going against.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. Yeah. Because the earthly authority, when we talk about authority, I mean, right now in this context, we're talking about government, but it could be any person of authority over you. It could be a boss. It could be your parents. It could be anybody who has a role of authority over you, you know, whatever that might look like. And that's a great example, yeah.
Or the LGBTQ, whatever, all the alphabet agenda.
Plus question mark, I think. I don't know. I think there's a plus and a question mark at the end now. I think.
But
I don't know.
they make people,
I might be wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know. But
corporations are now making people celebrate Gay Pride Day or Gay Pride Month, whatever it is. And they're forcing them to celebrate it, and they're having to choose between, you know, not celebrating it and getting castigated by the authorities that be at their jobs.
yeah.
Or celebrating it, which goes against God's will.
They sent out a thing at work where, like our signature on our email, we were supposed to put in our preferred pronouns. And I just deleted that little part and that's my signature, but I'm not playing that game.
Yeah.
And I just deleted it, and so mine does not have that on there, and nobody's ever said anything to me about it. But I'm not gonna play the woke agenda games ever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that. And so when that came out, I just put in my name and I just delete, and that's what my signature is.
Well,
They haven't done anything like that at my work yet. So
There's a basketball player that was kicked. He was a professional basketball player. This happened like 2 weeks ago. That was kicked off of his team because he would not celebrate the Gay Pride thing. They just kicked him off the team.
a professional basketball player.
Like an NBA
Yeah, he
team,
played
I
for
don't
the
remember
Chicago
the guy, but NBA.
Well, good for him for standing up for his beliefs, though.
Yeah,
That's
he did it on his
fantastic.
own personal podcast. It had nothing to do with the
Yeah, but
basketball.
they still kicked him off
I
the
know
team.
they did.
Well, that's like butt kicker getting all the blowback.
Oh, yeah.
Because he spoke at his college, which was completely outside of his NFL obligation and had nothing to do with it, and should never
Well,
have
he
been.
was blessed that the Chiefs owners are Christians.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
But he got a lot of blowback for
Yeah,
that.
he did.
Oh, he was blasted for that.
Yeah.
If they violate the contract,
He didn't say nothing
don't
wrong.
you have to pay them if they want them to do something that's against their religion? And if they kick them off?
Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on how the contract's written, but that's terrible. I mean, I'm glad that the guy stood up, and I wonder how many didn't stand up that felt the same way.
That's
you know. But it's troubling. It's troubling. Is it?
There are some, I believe, some countries in Europe and Canada where preaching Christian beliefs such as homosexuality being a sin is being classified as hate speech.
Oh, you can go to jail.
If you
And you
quote
can go to
scripture,
jail for standing up there on that pulpit and saying that homosexuality is a sin.
Well, you're just reading the Bible. That's all you're doing.
I wouldn't expect you to
I mean,
comply. I would expect you to preach God's word regardless of.
well, I'm not going to
earthly
skip a
authority.
section just because somebody doesn't like it.
that
Right.
has to go to Canada. You quote scripture.
Because there are parts I don't really like, but I don't skip them.
And it's hate speech and you're arrested right then and there. Yeah, the Bible's considered hate speech.
In some areas. Well, I suppose if you are embroiled in a life of sin and you are enchained by it, and it's got you under its control, then I could see how the Bible would appear hateful to anybody that was struggling to get out from sin or not even aware that they were under the control of it, but I feel like this whole idea of I don't know, it's frustrating to me because it seems so obvious to me that there's a God, and that because there's a God there have to be things that are right and wrong, and it just seems to me, it seems really obvious, and I struggle with the fact that some people it's not obvious for, or that they are rejecting that, maybe willfully rejecting it, but it puzzles me. I don't understand, and I don't know. And God is so forgiving, and so merciful, and so able to help with anything. It confounds me.
When I went to China, they told us to be very careful because we were smuggling Bibles,
Mhm.
not to mention Jesus out loud until we got to the underground church.
Mhm.
Well, I went down in the gift shop to see what they had, and one of the ladies in my group, I could hear her crying, and there was a bunch of Chinese people around her laughing, and I pushed through the crowd, and I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I forgot to put on a T-shirt that says Jesus, and they're laughing and making fun of me, and said they're scaring me." So I pulled her out, and I just said, so sorry," and got her out, and I said, "Go to the bathroom, turn your shirt in."
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, "Until we get to that underground church, we have to be careful."
Mhm. Yeah, that's dangerous. I mean,
It's a shame that, but here, thank God, still we can wear a shirt that says Jesus.
yeah. Yeah, we can be out there with our faith, and we should be. And yeah, I don't know. But I will say the thing about being in a persecuted area is the faith of the believers there is strong.
Oh,
It has to be. If you're under constant threat of being locked up or beaten or killed, disappeared from your family forever, your faith has to be strong to be, still worshiping and following Christ in those circumstances. So, not that I'm glad that they're in that situation, but I do envy it a little bit, because sometimes I feel like I wish my faith was stronger. But I feel like it's going to be getting a lot stronger these days, so that's good.
yeah, but the people in those countries, when you talk to them, they're so thankful for the Bibles they've been able to smuggle out to their homes and didn't get caught. And, here we carry our Bible around, don't worry about it. We don't have to worry about smuggling it.
I saw an email recently, and I was going to talk to Ron about it, but there was a ministry where they try to reach Muslims with the message of Jesus, but in areas where it's not safe to do so. And so one of the things that they have are invisible Bibles, which is a neat idea because basically it's a notebook, but if you put an ultraviolet light on it, it's the Bible.
Oh, it's like that movie.
And yeah, it's like that movie we watched where they had like only if you saw a certain thing you could see it. But I was like, that is really clever. And what? Yeah, it's like that movie. Yeah, and anyway,
Well, we supported, Calvary supported a girl named Laura Stewart. She's married now, and she's still doing mission work, but her husband's a doctor, so she doesn't need our help anymore. But she cannot go back over to the Mideast because she worked for the Voice of the Martyrs,
yeah,
and she was in Iran and Iraq and in places there. And they
she
cut
became
down
known.
on her head.
Oh,
They will actively kill her if she comes back over there.
wow. Huh. That's scary.
We're so lucky
So-
we can preach anywhere so far in the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are blessed to have that freedom because, I mean, you think about how long I had to ponder about whether I was going to preach or not. Can you imagine how much longer I'd have pondered if there was also a risk of imprisonment? I'd take up forever to make a decision anyway, but good night. But
Actually, you might have made the decision a little quicker.
maybe, I don't know. I like to give myself credit, maybe, but I don't know. Until you're faced with stuff, it's hard. Like you look at Peter, and you never would have guessed he would have denied the Lord 3 times. You know, he was so in love with Jesus. It seems crazy to me that he denied him 3 times. So you just don't know until you're in the situation how you'll react, and you just hope and pray that you react the right way. That you know.
After he was crucified. I mean, they went their ways, they went back to what they used to be doing.
Yeah.
Because
Well, they didn't know what to do, and
he was
but then he got him in that upper room, and he said, "All right, you just hang out here. Holy Spirit's a coming, you know, and then you go out and you do this, and lo, I am with you until the end of the age." All right, we got to keep going, or we're not going to get through this. Romans 13:6 and 7 says, "This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing." So Paul is a very logical guy, and he uses a lot of reasoning and tries to give support for his statements. And so he's trying to make the argument, yeah, nobody likes taxes. We all hate paying taxes. We get that. But, you know, these guys the authority is given to them by God. So therefore, they are God's servants. And they are working full time as God's servants. We should pay them, you know. And so that's one of his arguments there. He says, give, and then he goes on to say, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, taxes. If revenue, revenue. If respect, respect. Then honor, honor. And
Oh, no man, anything but love.
oh, no man, anything but love. Yeah, that's kind of the thing before where it was like, the only thing you should stay in debt on is love for one another. But basically, pay your debts, whatever they are, even if it's respect and honor. So he's telling them, because this was, as you mentioned, this was a government that was not necessarily supportive of the new Christian movement. You know, at this point, they weren't as hostile as they would become later on, but they weren't necessarily friendly to it. And but he's still encouraging them that, you know, okay, we still honor and respect, you know, they're placed by God. So you have to respect God's decision to place them there. God knows better than we do why he puts people where he puts them, you know. And so if he's chosen to do that, then good enough, you know. If it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me. So
the law of Moses and Paul did, raised as a Pharisee, he knew the scriptures back and forth.
and he was a Roman citizen.
And he was a Roman citizen, so who better than Paul to tell you, like, if you owe taxes and stuff like this, he would know. But like there's times he defied the government and he chose God's way and not the Roman way.
Yeah, he wasn't going to go against what God had determined. He goes on to say that the only continuing debt be to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law, which is that's just what Jesus was saying. That's love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and then love one another as Christ loved you. It's all about and by your love for one another, they will know you. Or he just so many times his new commandment is love one another, and this is not just talking about other believers. I think this is all people. We're to love all people, and that really fulfills the law, because if you love all people, that really takes care of everything else. And we have 5 minutes left to get through this last bit, so I'm going to try to fly, okay? Because we got a meeting coming up. But 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Now, Peter was writing from Rome at this time, and it was, I believe, Emperor Nero at this time. So it was becoming more and more unfriendly towards the Christians at this point. It was they were being persecuted pretty heavily at this point. But he says, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to the governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong, commend those who do right. So he's telling the people to submit to the authority of the emperor and the governors, and he's explained to them that they're sent there to punish those who do wrong, commend those who do right. Both of those sound great, He's not saying anything that a Roman, when he read that, would be like, oh, I have a problem with that, No, they'd be like, yeah, that sounds right. He goes on to say, for it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. And that is the case. I tell you, there's no better defense against people bad-mouthing you than having a good, solid witness that you haven't done anything. People know that, and they're not going to listen to it, or you'll be proved right.
Back then, they had to have two witnesses. When they were accused of something, there had to be two witnesses. And they would come up with these false witnesses when they accused Christ of being blasphemy because he would be claimed to be the Son of God. Well, he was.
Yeah, well, it's only blasphemy if you're not.
Right. But that's what they accused him of. And when he said, before Abraham was,
I am. Yeah. Oh, that's a great verse.
That just set their teeth on edge, because that's what that's what Moses was told to tell them. Who sent them? I am that I am sent you. So whenever Christ said I am, before Abraham was I am, that set their teeth on edge, because he was saying, I am God. Well, he was God in the flesh, the Son of God. And he did send Moses. And he is the I am.
Yeah.
And they did not want to hear that, because that was blasphemy. And I thought, well, I wonder if that's the reason why after that, whenever the prophets, whenever they were called by God or by the Lord, instead of saying, here I am, Lord, it's here am I.
Here am I. Yeah.
Because
Maybe.
if they said I am, that would be saying like I am God, so they didn't want to say that. Here am I.
And then some of it could be translation stuff too. But yeah, people will talk crazy about anybody these days. Just foolish talk, and or as it talks about here, ignorant talk. I remember when I was working at AT&T, I got accused of something, and if something potentially, it was illegal, and it would have cost me my job, and would have cost the company a bunch of money. But so they had corporate security come, do an investigation, all that, and they listened to the recordings. This is when I was on the phone doing sales on the phone, and they listened to like 500 and something phone calls that I had taken that month. They listened to each one of them to see if I had, because what I was accused of was I had won a sales contest, right? And there was a prize, and it was a good prize. And so someone had accused me of switching people's phone provider without their permission to get the sales numbers up, right? And so they went back and they listened to each and every call corporate security did. And of course I hadn't done it. I had, and so I was cleared. And anyway, in the course of hearing it, they had like, I don't know, 20 or 30 different commendation calls that were in there that I didn't even forward up, or whatever. And so they were like, oh yeah, it all worked out just fine. But my manager, when the accusations were first made, my manager came even before corporate security, and she told me, and she goes, this is ridiculous. This is just somebody being jealous. And because she knew, because you live a certain way, and that's the whole point of what Peter's saying there, is live in such a way that that the authorities, even if somebody does say something, are going to just be like, well, that's ridiculous, And then when it was all done, she told me who it was that had made the accusation and asked me if I wanted something done to them. But I said no. But anyway, I digress. We're at 11 o'clock. I think we'll just have to call it there. Do you think? But oh yeah, I got my prize. It was like I don't know if it was a big TV or something. It was a nice prize. Like it was $700 value prize. So it was like at the time, I mean, it was a nice color TV, big, this was back in the late 90s, so not like what they have today, but it was a very nice prize. Yeah. So,
We need to round people up.
but yeah, it's time for the business meeting. Yeah.
That mic works pretty good.
Good. Did you test it?